In 1917, the United States had no tanks, no doctrine, no factories built for them, no officers who had ever commanded one in battle. Britain and France were already fighting with armor on the Western Front. America was starting from zero. What followed was not a straight climb to the M1 Abrams. It was a century of engineers wrestling with the same unsolved problem, over and over, in different forms. How much armor can you carry before you're too slow? How big a gun can you fit before you're too heavy? And how do you build it fast enough and cheap enough to actually win a war with it? Most of the answers along the way were wrong. A few of them changed tank design forever. This is the complete story of American armor, every major tank, every important failure, and every strange detour in between. From a converted tractor crawling through the mud of the First World War to a hybrid electric prototype being tested today. Part 1. World War I and the First Experiments, 1917-1919. America had no tank industry to draw on, so its earliest designs borrowed heavily from allies, while a handful of homegrown ideas were tested in parallel, some promising, most impractical. The Holt gas-electric tank used a petro-electric transmission, a gasoline engine driving a generator that powered electric motors at each track, removing the need for a mechanical gearbox, a genuinely advanced idea for 1917, undone by a hull too heavy and unreliable for the mud it was meant to cross. The skeleton tank went the opposite direction entirely, built almost as an open iron pipe frame, instead of solid armor, in an attempt to span wide trenches without the weight penalty. Neither reached the front. The Ford 3-ton M1918 took a different approach. Build it small, cheap, and in overwhelming numbers, using components borrowed from Ford's civilian production lines. The war ended before that plan could be tested. What America did field in numbers was the M1917 light tank, a licensed copy of the French Renault FT, built because there wasn't time to design anything better. It arrived too late for combat, but went on to serve as the backbone of American armor for years afterward. The one genuine heavyweight of the era was the Mark VIII Liberty, an Anglo-American project. American engines and drivetrain components built for a British-designed hull, intended for assembly on both sides of the Atlantic. It was long enough to cross trenches nothing else could, but that same length made it a nightmare to transport by rail and nearly impossible to recover once bogged down. The war ended with America having built more prototypes than proven designs, but it had, for the first time, engineers who understood what armored warfare actually demanded. Part 2. Interwar Development, Searching for a Doctrine, 1919-1935. With no war to justify the spending, tank development nearly stalled through the 1920s. What survived was driven by a small number of designers trying to answer a basic question: what should an American tank even look like? The M1921 medium tank gave the first real answer, introducing a fully rotating turret, a layout that would define nearly every tank built after it. The M1922 refined the idea with a complex cable-driven suspension that promised a smoother ride and mostly delivered a maintenance headache. The T1 light tank series tested new automotive ideas through the decade, fast for their time but too thinly armored to survive real combat. Two designs stood out from the rest. The T2 medium tank tried to force a large gun and multiple machine guns into one heavy, boxy hull, and simply became too heavy for its own engine. And in the late 1920s, engineer Walter Christie built the T1 Christie, a convertible tank that could run on tracks or shed them entirely and drive on wheels, blisteringly fast on roads, but too radical for an army that wasn't ready for it. Christie wasn't finished. His next design would change tank engineering worldwide. Part 3. The Christie Suspension and the Road to War, 1931-1940. The M1931 Christie is widely regarded as his masterpiece, a suspension system so effective it let the tank move at speeds simply unheard of in 1931. The design was turned down at home, but the concept didn't stay home for long. The Soviet Union adopted it almost wholesale, and it became the mechanical ancestor of the BT and T-34 tank lines that would later face American tanks on the other side of a very different war. American cavalry, meanwhile, faced a legal obstacle. The National Defense Act reserved tanks exclusively for the infantry branch, so the cavalry couldn't operate them under that name. Its workaround was administrative rather than technical. The same vehicles were simply classified and designated as combat cars instead, letting mounted units field armor without ever calling it a tank. The resulting M1 combat car series was fast, thin-skinned, and built purely for scouting. Its direct descendant, the M2 light tank, started out with an odd battleship-inspired layout of multiple small turrets before settling into the single-turret design that would carry into the coming war. Parallel experiments, the Christie suspended T4 medium and the wheeled T7 combat car, pushed speed to its limits but exposed how badly these designs handled anything but flat, dry ground. The M2 medium tank, bristling with machine guns pointed in every direction, wasn't a great fighting vehicle, but it taught designers exactly what a real medium tank needed to be. Meanwhile, small Marmon Harrington light tanks, built cheaply for export customers, quietly filled gaps during the chaotic opening months of the coming war. By 1940, American tank design had spent 2 decades experimenting. It was about to run out of time to keep experimenting. Part 4. World War II. Light tanks. America's light tanks were built to answer one question: how do you scout, screen, and skirmish faster than the enemy can react? The M3 Stuart answered it well enough that British crews gave it an affectionate nickname, Honey, for its speed and mechanical dependability, even though its thin armor kept it out of direct tank duels. A handful of stranger designs briefly shared the arsenal: the MTLS-1 G14, built for the Dutch East Indies with 2 main guns crammed into one turret, and the CTMS, another export market survivor that never found a real role once America entered the war. 2 light tanks stood apart. The M22 Locust was small enough to be carried into battle by glider, a genuinely clever solution to the problem of arming paratroopers, undermined by armor too thin to survive contact once it landed. And the M24 Chaffee, arriving late in the war, was a genuine leap forward. A 75mm gun and a smooth modern suspension made it one of the most effective reconnaissance vehicles of the entire conflict. Light tanks solved the problem of speed. The war itself would be decided by something heavier. Part 5. World War II. Medium tanks. By 1941, America faced an urgent problem. It needed a tank that could fight immediately, and it needed one that could be built by the tens of thousands. The stopgap came first. The M3 Lee, known to the British as the Grant, was tall and awkward by design, mounting its 75mm main gun in a right-hand spunson low in the hull rather than the turret, with only limited traverse to either side. It looked like a compromise because it was one, but it put a real anti-tank gun into Allied hands at a moment when nothing else could. Then came the tank that decided the argument. The M4 Sherman was never the best armored tank of the war, and it was never the most powerfully armed. What it was buildable, reliable enough to keep running, simple enough to repair in the field, and produced in numbers no other nation could match. That combination, not raw firepower, is what made the Sherman the backbone of Allied armor from North Africa to Berlin. Behind it, a string of experimental successors, the T-20, T-22, and T-23, tested lower hull profiles and advanced transmissions that never replaced the Sherman outright, but fed directly into the next generation of American tank design. The Sherman's success revealed America's real advantage in this war. Not the best tank on paper, but the most tank on the battlefield. That same lesson would resurface again and again. Part 6. Heavy tanks and the race for firepower. If the Sherman solved the problem of quantity, America's heavy tank programs existed to solve a different one. What happens when you finally meet an enemy tank the Sherman can't beat? The answer came late. The M6 heavy tank, America's first real attempt at the class, carried serious armor and firepower and weighed so much that most European bridges couldn't hold it. A joint project with Britain, the T-14 heavy tank, went nowhere once planners decided mobility mattered more than raw protection. The real answer arrived in 1944, the M26 Pershing, finally giving American crews a tank that could stand up to the German Tiger. It came too late to change the outcome in Europe, but it proved the design was sound enough that an experimental variant, the T-26E4 Super Pershing, tried bolting on an even bigger gun, at the cost of a hull so nose-heavy it strained its own suspension. What came after Pershing reads like a race with no finish line. The T-28, later redesignated the T-95, was less a tank than a moving fortress, and technically wasn't classified as one at all. Without a turret, and with its enormous gun fixed in the hull front, it was officially a gun motor carriage, built purely to punch through the heaviest German fortifications. It needed 4 sets of tracks just to carry its own weight, and it was already obsolete before it was finished. The T-29, built specifically to hunt the King Tiger, never saw combat, but its turret and gun design shaped heavy tank thinking for years afterward. The T-30 carried a 155 mm gun, built purely for smashing fortifications, while the T-32 was essentially a Pershing wrapped in far thicker armor. The line ended with the T-34, fitted with a converted anti-aircraft gun for genuinely serious armor-piercing power, the last heavy tank concept to emerge directly from the Second World War. None of these late-war heavies reached the battlefield in time, but almost every idea inside them would resurface in the tanks built to fight the next war. But the next answer wouldn't come from another heavy tank. America was about to try something radically different. Fast, lightly armored machines built not to fight tanks head-on, but to hunt them. And one of them would become the fastest tracked combat vehicle of the entire war.